Thanks, Felipe. That was really fun. So I'm really excited to introduce our final speaker of the night. So he gave us 4 fun facts, and he has a lot of slides. So his first fact, It's Raining Men by the Weather Girls is his theme song. He has never had a chicken wing, and he has to order tiramisu at any restaurant that serves it. And he ate a peanut butter and mustard sandwiches as a kid. That is very interesting. All right, Jayson, come on up here and share your fuck up.
Thank you. I love how pretty much all of those things are food related, which tells you a lot about me. And I also love how the majority, well, actually pretty much all of you have had cold feet as far as sharing your fuck up publicly, while all 3 of us have to do it. But I'm incredibly excited. I got to give a round of applause, please, everybody, for Marcia, for bringing this to Waterloo. This is fantastic. So, do we have any entrepreneurs in the room or aspiring entrepreneurs? Somebody that okay, perfect. So, bending the rules is kind of part of the job, so to speak. So, I know there was like a rule in place of like 10 slides, and I reached out to Marcia. I'm like, I have like 74. Is that okay? And she was willing to accommodate. So some of you may know a little bit about me, but the majority of you don't. So my goal is to blitz through these slides real quickly to bring you up to speed so that we can end the night hopefully on a high note. Cool? All right, so I mean, over the years, most people have seen my trajectory or my level of success on this very linear kind of fashion, but like most of us, look something more like this. I actually dropped out of high school, and like most people who start a business, oftentimes we subscribe to the idea of finding a business based on opportunity and proximity. How can we make the most amount of money as quickly as possible, given sometimes our limited skill sets? And I started a service-based business, but I realized that early on that service-based businesses are hard to scale, so I pivoted into an online product business, which I grew to about $7 million a year, over 4 years with no outside investments. We were in the ticketing space, think like StubHub in Canada, so to speak. And I was living my models of success. I was traveling the world, making a ton of money. With all that money and all that free time, I started to ask myself questions like, why am I here? Whoops, there's a little bit of a delay. Oh, there is. Is this on? Hold on. Why am I here? Will I be remembered? You know what's funny? You want to hear a funny thing? I was pacing back and forth up there because I've done a ton of talks, but I always get incredibly nervous. And then I smiled because I'm like, it would be on brand for me to fuck up this talk because it's Fuckup Nights. So why am I here? Will I be remembered? How many people will show up to my funeral? And I was not happy with the answers I was giving myself. So around that same time, I realized I was earning 22 times the national average income, which was bothersome to me because I was not 22 times happier than the average male. I was not 22 times healthier. I actually had kidney complications because of stress at the age of 23. So I realized that money and happiness scale very differently. And I felt like I was stuck on this hamster wheel where I built this business I hated to enable me to buy things I didn't need, to impress people I didn't like. And I felt like I was stuck on this roller coaster and I just couldn't get off. So I became comfortable with the idea of scaling the business down to zero. I could have stayed in that business and positioned it for sale and had a nice little exit. But for me, when I realized I wasn't in alignment with the work that I was doing, I couldn't stay on for another 2-3 years to position the business for sale, sell it, and do some kind of earn-out. So the goal was to scale down to zero and then start something new. Unfortunately, 2 things happened that were beyond my control on that way down. It was really death of 1,000 paper cuts, but when the dust settled, I was $250,000 in debt in August of 2012. It was funny you made mention of September of 2012. I'm like, that fucking 2012. I was bankrupt on every level, emotionally, spiritually, financially, physically. It was a tough time, and the house of cards fell in August. September 1st, my daughter turned 6 months old, and September 1st, I married my wife. So there's a saying that when one door closes, another one opens, but it sucks to be stuck in the hallway. That was a very dark hallway for me at the time. And for those of you, who here's driven to Toronto? All of you. All right, so here's a fun little fuck-up story. So I was driving to Toronto one day, and everything went to shit. And if you go down 427 and you go onto the Gaignard, if you know those, I actually grew up in the West End, so I know all the streets. You hit Kipling, you hit Islington, you hit Royal York, and you hit Park Lawn. And then off in the distance, the highway splits into two. One side goes towards the lakeshore, and the other side keeps you on the Gaignard to go into the city. Well, while I was driving, I don't remember what was going on that day, but I remembered hearing this voice, basically, or not even this voice, it was a decision made that I was going to drive my car into this fresh concrete median, splitting the road. And I remember when I made that decision, it wasn't even like a conscious decision that I was going to debate. I just was heading towards it. And I remember as soon as I made this decision, I was just, this emotion of peace just washed over me, a level of peace I've never felt before and I've never felt since. And while I was driving towards that concrete median, I remember looking down at the steering wheel and seeing the word airbag in very distinct font. And I'm like, with my luck, I will have, to stay on brand, I will have fucked up as an entrepreneur, I will have fucked up as a father, will have fucked up as a husband, and ultimately will have fucked up at killing myself as well. So I pulled off to the side of the highway and kind of regrouped a little bit. And J.K. Rowling has a saying, rock bottom became a solid foundation on which to rebuild my life, and that was very much the case for me at that point in time. Luckily, I was saved by Facebook. Now, in this environment, you may be wondering, oh, maybe he had some Facebook stock that he didn't know. No, unfortunately, it's not because of that. A friend of mine posted on Facebook that she had an extra ticket to go see a guy named Seth Godin in New York. And I had no other obligations at the time, so I actually pulled up this post. I haven't seen this post in, 6 years, and I pulled it up for this talk. So it brought me down memory lane. But I decided, hey, I'll take the ticket. I have no other obligations, and stayed in some kind of hostel in New York, which I do not recommend. But I went, and I didn't know the theme of this workshop, but I'm a huge fan of Seth's work. And it turned out the theme of it was the connection economy and how there's huge value connecting like-minded individuals. And I felt very isolated and alone and lonely as an entrepreneur. So I started these things called Mastermind dinners, where I'd invite 8 entrepreneurs out for dinner with a core focus of connecting them. And truth be told, the first one I did, I almost canceled 2 hours prior, because I'm like, nobody's going to see value in this. They're going to think I completely wasted their time. But thankfully, it turned out to be a great success. So I continued to do these dinners, and I was paying for them out of pocket, which people thought was crazy. But for me, I had just a little bit of credit left, and I didn't know how I was going to make rent. But I had a little bit of credit left, and the reasoning for me that I had going into it was that the bank could take my car, they could take whatever measly assets I left, but they couldn't take my relationships. Investing my relationships, to me, was the safest investment I could make. Fast forward the following month, I had an opportunity that landed in my lap to do something with Tim Ferriss. So I've known Tim since 2011, and in 2012, he was coming out with a book called The 4-Hour Chef, which was the worst out of his 6 books, unfortunately, and you'll hear why I say unfortunately in a second. He was a 2-time New York Times bestselling author at that point in time. He had the 4-Hour Work Week and the 4-Hour Body, and he found out 2 weeks before the book was about to launch that he was going to be banned from all retail distribution for the 4-Hour Chef. And the reason for that is that he was the first big-name author to publish through Amazon. And traditional publishing wanted to make an example out of him because Amazon was being too much of a big player in the space, not only from a retail perspective, but now publishing as well. And Tim's one of the smartest book marketers I know. So what he did was he created these book bundles where if you bought 5 books, he'd give you some additional resources. If you bought 50 books, maybe he'd do a webinar with you. Well, he had this Hail Mary package that if you bought 4,000 books, he'd do 2 speaking engagements. And when I saw it, I said, this is a great opportunity. I actually reached out to a friend of mine. I used to wake up really early at the time, so I was one of the first people to see the post, and he was only offering 1 package. And I thought of a friend of mine named Scott who does these big events across Canada called The Art Of. And I reached out and I sent him an email and I said, this is a great opportunity for you because Tim's never spoken in Canada and he doesn't speak all that often. And you could probably move the books because he has 2,000-3,000 people that show up at his events. And the minute I clicked send on that email, I said, it's a great opportunity for anybody. And he's only offering 1 package. So I reached out to Tim. I sent him an email directly and I said, I'll take the package. The problem was, again, I was broke. And I had to come up with $84,000. Now, that wasn't necessarily the scary part. The scary part was I had 72 hours to do it. And my businesses prior to that were all built on credit cards. I was raised with a belief system that you don't ask for anything, you do everything on your own. So I knew there was no way for me to just muster up $84,000 legally, so I reached out to 3 friends. The first friend said, sounds really interesting. He said, come back to me with some numbers. And I'm like, that's not going to help me in the sense that this is an industry that I don't know. It's a business idea that's only a few hours old. And I'm not a numbers thinker as an entrepreneur. I'm very kind of like intuition driven. So I'm like, let me call you back. Second person I talked to, he said, let's start a business together and we'll go 50-50. And I'm like, that sounds amazing. I have one more person to call. The third person I called, I've had like 3 failed business partnerships. So I'm like, this sounds really good, but past history shows that I'll fuck this up somehow. And then the third person I called, I was like halfway through the pitch, and he just stopped me and he said, come to my office tomorrow morning, pick up a check. I just ended the phone call right there. I probably showed up at his office 2 hours prior, just waiting outside in case he called to say, like, you know what, I'm having second thoughts, and I'd be like, I'm already outside. So I got that check, ran to the bank, deposited it, sent the money to Tim, and that was $84,000 US, as a heads up, not Canadian. So it was even harder to get. But ultimately, this was the hardest Facebook post I ever had to make. I knew in November, December, I was doing the event, and I was ready to start selling tickets. It took me till February 9th to actually make the post because I was afraid that if this event was a flop, I would be even more of a failure. And you can see my level of influence back then. I had 24 likes for like the biggest moment of my life. So yeah, put it out there to the world. And thankfully, it turned out to be a huge success. I always say that ignorance, confidence, and hard work can go a long way when you're an entrepreneur. And because of that, our events are much more similar to a wedding than they are a conference, just because I didn't know how conferences are. And it's been, for context, I actually wasn't planning this, but we've just finished our 6th event in Park City. We've had over 17,000 entrepreneurs apply since our inception in 2013 for an event that's capped at 150 people annually. And we've raised the price every year, but admission is $12,000 for next year. And Cabo, actually, 2019 is sold out. So yeah, we've had great success with this little business. And the funny thing is after that first event, I reached back out to my friend who basically gave me that money. I've paid him back, but ultimately we didn't really have a conversation about it. And then after our first event was a success, I reached out to him and I said, why did you give me that money? Because it makes no sense on any level, because I'm a 27-year-old, failure as an entrepreneur, $250,000 in debt. I'm like in nothing but like survival mode, right? And this is industry I have no experience in, and it's only, a business idea itself is only a few hours old. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, I wasn't investing in the business, I was investing in you. And at that point in time, 2 things became very clear. 1 is you never know the value of your network until you really need it. And 2, when you hit rock bottom in life, and I fundamentally believe we all hit rock bottom at some point in time, you'll be left with 2 things: your word and your relationships. So never tarnish your word and always invest in your relationships. Thank you.
Wow, that was incredible. Jayson, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I think it just goes to show that rock bottom is a beautiful place to start. So let's open it up for questions. I'll put up the slide. There we go. Who wants to kick us off with our first question?
You had this quote in your talk: ignorance, confidence, and hard work. Could you explain that?
Yeah, I don't have a mic. I don't know if it matters. That's fine. Hello? The beautiful thing about this brand is literally, like, there could be AV fuck-ups, there could be, like, registration fuck-ups. It doesn't matter. It'd be like, it's all on brand. So ignorance, confidence, and hard work can go a long way, right? Yeah, I mean, again, for me to lean into that industry, it was one of those things that because I didn't know how to do an event, I didn't know how hard it would be. And one thing I learned when I committed to buying those $84,000 of books, I didn't know how much speakers get paid. Like, I didn't know if Tim was worth $42,000 a speaking engagement. Ultimately, he was. He charges like $100,000 a speaking engagement. So it actually worked out to be a deal. So that ignorance just kind of played in my benefit. And I always realized, like, when I grew that first business so quickly, without any outside debt or any of that kind of stuff, one of the core fundamental reasons is I always threw these like Hail Mary throws, and I'd always find a way to like make it work. There's something called eustress, which is like positive stress. So it's like taking these big leaps. And that for me was that kind of opportunity. And just the ignorance of not knowing like how hard, like after I got, so I got the 4,000 books. Actually, I still have 3,000 of them, 3,100 in like Colorado, but we'll talk about that later. Which is why I said it's the worst book. I can't do anything with it. And if anybody needs it, if Shopify wants 3,000 copies, if you ship them here, they're yours. But the funny thing is I ended up buying the books. I knew I was going to do an event. I started reaching out to event planners in February for an event that was happening in May. And not a single event planner would take me on because they're like, you don't have enough time. Like, this is bound to be a fuck up. And I just didn't know. I was just ignorant. But I was willing to put in the work. And ultimately, our first event was a huge success. We had 4,200 entrepreneurs apply for that first event. So yeah, ignorance can go a long way. And I'm definitely pretty ignorant. So there was another question right there. You've been asking questions all night. I was hoping I get a question from you.
Thanks. For the third investor who you said invested in you, I was wondering if you'd had the opportunity to like see yourself in someone else and maybe invest in their future, or like what that would take if you haven't had that moment yet.
Have I invested in other people on that
Yeah,
level?
like on an individual
100%.
basis.
I mean, I learned so much because I will never forget that guy. I mean, no matter how successful I get, I will never forget that moment. To me, one of the, like I always talk, my general talks around like relationships and networking and investing in relationships and that kind of stuff. And the one thing I learned in that moment is that if you want to invest in a relationship, the best time to make an investment in a relationship is when somebody's most vulnerable and you be their biggest fan. And it doesn't have to be like you're investing financially, but just investing with belief, which is ultimately what that was. I do that at every single opportunity I can. If I see somebody that's like, whenever somebody's going to be vulnerable, whether it be like for a speaking engagement, you know, people are anxious and that kind of stuff. I'll be their raving fan if they're launching a book, they're launching a new business. You know, I'll try to be the first one to buy, you know, their product and those kind of things. So I'm always looking for opportunities to be somebody's biggest fan in that time of vulnerability. So yeah, it's something I implement a lot in my own life now. 7 more. No, I'm joking. Of course.
So first of all, I just want to say that I think it's really amazing how real and casual and honest you were about your suicide attempt, or like potential suicide attempt.
Yeah, I fucked it up.
Yeah, you're a big fuck up, pretty big fuck up, potentially really big fuck up.
Thankfully, I fucked it up though. But yeah.
Yeah, well, like I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about what you might do now on like a regular basis, or if you don't do anything now to like protect your brain and keep it safe, and like what do you do for your mental health, and how like has that become more important?
It's
to you
real
over
funny you
time?
ask, because I'm speaking at an event tomorrow on mental health. So this has been very kind of top of mind, and it's a mental health event for entrepreneurs specifically. And it's funny, this is like probably the second time I've shared this, and I've given God knows how many talks, because I still have a lot of judgment around the whole notion of suicide, or like attempts or what have you, and it's something I don't understand. And the one thing about it, the one thing I'm going to talk about tomorrow is that, you know, on some level I'm on the other side. Like I have meaningful relationships, I do meaningful work, you know, I'm fulfilled on to the nth degree. But the more successful I get, the more I'm scared of slipping, because I can feel myself slipping sometimes. Even when, you know, from the outside, people are like, oh my God, your life's amazing. So it's something I don't understand, and it's something I constantly feel. When I know, like now that I know what that rock bottom was, you never forget it. And even that level of peace of like when I decided like I'm gonna run my car into that concrete median, I never forget. It still gives me chills just to think about it. And once you experience that the first time, like you never forget it. And like I said, sometimes I feel myself slipping, and I try to surround myself with great friends. Who I have a few, you know, in the audience here tonight, and that's been amazing. You know, have a therapist, which I fucking highly recommend. She started as a couples therapist, and that's been amazing. And then, yeah, I mean, I just have open and honest and frank conversations with a lot of people. But with that said, I think one of the big factors is it's never been easier to kind of almost like move into the background, because most of our communication is through social media, right? So it's easy to project life is going great on Instagram and that kind of stuff. Like, to me, fake news isn't just, a thing found in politics. Fake news is Instagram. Fake news is Facebook. And I was thinking about it a lot today because, like I said, there's a lot of studies that show that one of the biggest things to like protect you from these type of things is great relationships. And I have great relationships. I have some of the best relationships and a ton of them, but I can still find opportunities to kind of like shield myself from them and move into that dark place. So I think face-to-face, because you can lie on social media, you can't lie face-to-face. So I have core friends that I schedule meetings with every quarter. We'll just go out for a dinner, what have you, and eventually we'll just talk shop and stuff like that, and that's always been truly helpful. But it's something I don't have it figured out. So, thanks.
Perfect. I think that's a really good place to end it. Jayson, thank you again for sharing your story.
Thank you, everyone.